What happens when an influencer with millions of young followers starts promoting gambling and explicit content? Well, Jack Doherty found out the hard way. What seemed like just another sponsorship turned into a full-blown internet disaster. The moment he took on risky promotions, he lost everything: his audience, his reputation, and his credibility. Stick around to find out how one bad decision spiraled into a viral meltdown. When Jack Doherty teamed up with gambling platforms, it seemed like a typical influencer deal. At first glance, it didn't appear all that different from the countless brand partnerships influencers have been doing for years. But for Jack, this wasn't just another sponsorship. It quickly spiraled into his first major misstep. With millions of followers, many of them teens and young adults, Jack had a platform with a significant amount of influence. However, instead of using that power responsibly, he used it to promote an industry that's linked to addiction, financial ruin, and emotional distress. For most of his audience, gambling isn't just a game, it's a dangerous and expensive habit. Yet Jack, seemingly unaware of the potential consequences, dove headfirst into the world of promoting online gambling.
So one thing that a lot of people were asking about, that I'll just relay for you, is your primary source of income. Where would you say you make the most amount of money on the internet? If you don't mind disclosing that. If you do, that's
I'm pretty sure you're digging for the OnlyFans answer. No, I'm kidding, but obviously, it's not like, so that's not known. But yeah, a decent amount of my money comes from OnlyFans management and that side of things.
The problem, his audience was largely young, impressionable, and impressionable teens who looked to him for entertainment and now influence. These young people, many still in their formative years, were now being exposed to gambling in a way that could normalize it or worse, encourage unhealthy behaviors. As the backlash grew louder, Jack tried to downplay the situation, claiming that it was just a harmless ad campaign and that people were overreacting. But by brushing off the criticism and failing to take responsibility, he only made the situation worse.
But also a decent chunk of it, my monthly income comes from my own stuff. I have a kick deal, I have a gambling deal, I have a YouTube channel and a bunch of other stuff. So I make enough money, off just myself. But
the more he denied the issue, the more people started calling out his irresponsible actions. Many pointed out that as an influencer, Jack had a duty to protect his audience, not exploit them for profit. The ethical implications were crystal clear. Jack wasn't just endorsing a product, he was endorsing a dangerous behavior that could have long-lasting negative effects on his young audience. The responsibility that comes with such a massive platform should have been at the forefront of his decision-making, but instead, Jack seemed more focused on the paycheck. His platform was now being used to push something that could put vulnerable people at risk, and that's exactly what his critics were angry about.
I wanted to, talk on that fact. So you said you had a gambling deal. Is that what the website?
No, I was about to work with them, but I ended up just going with a different company. I literally just locked it in.
So awesome. So basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to get paid to stream yourself gambling, correct?
Basically.
Okay, and do you have some sort of code where like someone can sign up with your code and then you'll get a percent of that?
What are you, the feds?
I'm just wondering. Do you have a code? Because there's a lot of ethical issues people have with people.
No, I don't have a code yet. We haven't even figured all that out yet. But it's more of like I just rock the brand. I don't even gotta gamble. I don't like gambling. I'm not really for gambling.
So why are you doing a gambling deal then? Because I'm
money. At the end of the day, we all do things for money. But
I know, but so you say you don't like gambling, but you're willing to do it just for money.
I don't like Jack Doherty, but I got a call with him. No, I'm kidding, but
no, it's just an interview.
While Jack may have brushed off the criticism, he quickly found himself caught in a web of his own making. His attempts at damage control were feeble at best, and the more he tried to explain himself, the more the backlash grew. Fans were disillusioned. The audience that had once looked up to Jack as a source of entertainment was now questioning his motives and integrity. And while some might have believed it was just another sponsorship, others saw it for what it really was: Jack's first big stumble that exposed his willingness to sell out for money. This wasn't the first time Jack faced backlash, but this time, his defense wouldn't be enough to stop the growing tide of criticism. Let's dive into the deeper fallout from these reckless moves. As the gambling promotions continued, so did the outrage. What started as a single controversial deal quickly escalated into a full-blown scandal that rocked Jack's reputation. It wasn't just about him endorsing gambling, it was about the broader implications of such a partnership, especially for an influencer with the kind of massive, predominantly young audience that Jack had. The internet erupted with criticism, calling out the hypocrisy of an influencer who, just months prior, had claimed to care deeply about his fans, but was now shilling for an industry with a reputation for ruining lives. What made this situation even more disturbing was the demographic that Jack catered to. His followers weren't just adults, they were mostly teens and preteens who were still impressionable, seeking excitement and validation and that next dopamine hit. Jack wasn't just promoting gambling, he was putting his stamp of approval on something that could have devastating long-term consequences for people who weren't even old enough to fully understand the risks involved. His role as an influencer now seemed at odds with the responsibility that should come with it, yet Jack kept pushing forward with his endorsement. It was a dangerous mix of naivety, selfishness, and an alarming disregard for the influence he had over his audience. The backlash against him wasn't just loud, it was deafening. Fans took to social media to voice their outrage. Videos, memes, and commentaries flooded the platforms, all pointing out that Jack was just another cog in the machine of influencer culture that was more interested in quick money than the well-being of the people who made them famous.
Do you feel like it may be a negative thing by any chance to promote gambling to especially, you know, a younger audience, considering the fact that it may cause them into signing up onto these gambling sites and becoming gambling addicts themselves?
I mean, as long as they use my code, I'm completely okay with it.
So you're okay with them developing a gambling addiction as long as it financially benefits yourself?
Bro, I don't think I'm gonna be starting anyone's gambling addiction. I'm not going that deep into it, bro. I'm just trying to get a bag.
But at the end of the day, I'm just curious, why do you keep saying something and then saying I'm just kidding after?
You can't control people do online. You know, if I'm gonna get someone if I don't get someone into gambling because of my videos, then someone else is gonna get that person into gambling.
Yeah, but you can influence what people do online, right?
The conversation shifted from Jack being a simple influencer to a symbol of everything wrong with the influencer industry as a whole, prioritizing profit over personal responsibility. People saw him as someone willing to sacrifice his credibility and ethics for the sake of a payday, and the backlash only gained momentum as more of his audience began to question their own loyalty to him. Jack, instead of taking the criticism seriously, decided to downplay the situation by using his now infamous defense. "I'm just kidding." He claimed that everything he said and did was just a joke.
Yeah, somebody can be like, "I'm Jack Doherty's biggest fan. I'm watching Jack Doherty gamble right now. This looks so cool, so now I'm gonna go gamble myself. And I may be using money that I don't have because I'm not rich like Jack Doherty and I'm not playing with house money like Jack Doherty."
I know not to gamble. Obviously I have a lot of money and I don't gamble.
But so you agree that gambling is you think that gambling is a stupid thing to do, correct?
Sure.
So why would you willingly promote that to your fans?
What? Because why not? No, I'm kidding. But like, I mean, can
I ask you a question? Why do you, is that like a trick?
An attempt at humor, and that anyone who took it seriously was overreacting. But this only worsened his position. Instead of addressing the very real concerns about the potential harms of gambling, especially for minors, he mocked his critics, dismissed their concerns, and completely avoided any responsibility for his actions. It was clear to the internet that Jack wasn't interested in a genuine conversation about accountability. He was more concerned with brushing off the fallout with a few sarcastic comments. This "I'm just kidding" excuse only exposed how out of touch Jack had become with the very people who made him famous. His dismissiveness turned what could have been a teachable moment into a growing storm of anger and frustration. Fans who once looked up to him as an entertainer now saw him as an embodiment of everything wrong with influencer culture, someone who was more than willing to sell out his morals for a paycheck. As the criticism mounted, Jack's responses became more deflective, mocking, and defensive. Instead of owning up to his mistake, he continued to make light of the situation, digging himself deeper into the hole. The hypocrisy was undeniable. Jack had built his platform on the idea that he cared about his audience, but now he was promoting something that could harm them in a very real way. It wasn't just about the gambling promotion, it was about the way he handled the entire controversy, by making excuses, dodging responsibility, and disrespecting the concerns of his fans. And the internet wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. But as the dust began to settle from the gambling controversy, Jack Doherty was about to step into an even darker storm, one that would only make his reputation worse. Jack's go-to defense during the gambling fiasco was the classic "I'm just kidding" excuse, a tactic that became his shield throughout the controversy. But this defense wasn't just ineffective, it made everything worse.
A lot of people have, you know, some fault with you promoting OnlyFans to young children. What would you say to these people who say that, you know, that's an irresponsible thing to do? You know, making videos for young children with editing that's stylized for young children, and then at the end of these videos, what you're doing is promoting pornography. What do you say to that?
Business, dog. What are you gonna do about it?
It's just business.
I'm kidding.
Instead of genuinely addressing the legitimate concerns of his fans, many of whom were young and impressionable, Jack minimized the issue by brushing it off as a joke. This approach not only made him look out of touch, but also completely disregarded the weight of the criticism. By leaning into the just kidding excuse, he gave the impression that he didn't take his audience seriously or care about the potential harm his actions could cause. The issue wasn't just that Jack wasn't owning up to his mistakes, it was that he was actively avoiding any real accountability. Fans were frustrated, especially because Jack had built his brand on being relatable and caring about his followers. Now, when faced with actual concerns, his defense came across as dismissive and immature. He didn't acknowledge the real consequences of promoting gambling to a young audience or the ethical concerns that arose from his partnership with the industry. Instead of engaging in a mature discussion or apologizing, he simply tried to laugh it off. The more Jack used the "I'm just kidding" defense, the more it became a running joke that his critics latched onto. It turned into a symbol of his inability to face any real scrutiny and his reluctance to own up to his actions. Rather than repairing the situation, this approach only fueled the anger of those who had already been disappointed by him. It wasn't just about a bad joke anymore. It was about Jack's failure to take responsibility for his platform's influence and the harm he might be causing. As his deflections continued, it became evident that Jack wasn't even attempting to make amends or learn from the situation. Instead, he was doubling down on his behavior, making it clear that he wasn't ready to accept the consequences of his actions. The longer he hid behind his jokes, the more the internet was ready to hold him accountable. But as the just kidding defense failed to land, Jack didn't stop there. What he did next took things to a whole new level and made his reputation even harder to salvage. His involvement with OnlyFans would be the next scandal to ignite the firestorm. While the gambling promotion might have been bad, Jack's involvement with OnlyFans was a far more serious issue. Here, Jack wasn't just pushing an industry linked to addiction and financial ruin. He was endorsing explicit content aimed at an audience, many of whom were still minors. Jack had already made a name for himself as a brash prankster, known for his bold, sometimes reckless behavior. But this move raised serious questions about his responsibility as an influencer, promoting adult content to young fans, especially when those fans looked up to him and idolized him, crossed a line for many. The ethical implications were undeniable. He was guiding his impressionable audience toward a world that often has a deeply negative impact on mental health, self-esteem, and body image. Jack's response to the backlash, it was dismissive at best. Instead of apologizing or offering a thoughtful explanation, Jack doubled down on his mocking attitude. He called his critics business dogs, an attempt to belittle them and deflect from the serious concerns that had been raised. This wasn't just arrogance, it was a complete failure to acknowledge the gravity of the situation. By refusing to engage with the criticism in any meaningful way, Jack made it clear that he wasn't taking his role as an influencer seriously, and that his priority was making money, not protecting the young minds who followed him. The reality of the situation was that Jack wasn't just promoting a business, he was promoting a platform known for explicit material, which is often criticized for its effect on young people's perceptions of sex and relationships. The very idea that Jack, with his massive following, could be exposing so many vulnerable fans to such content was deeply troubling. Instead of taking responsibility, he deflected and mocked the concerns, further alienating his fanbase. The backlash was swift and severe, as more and more people spoke out against Jack's actions and his refusal to take accountability. By treating the issue with such flippancy, Jack essentially normalized the exposure of minors to adult content, further deepening the divide between himself and his audience. What should have been a moment for introspection and change became another example of Jack's inability to grasp the weight of his actions, and the internet wasn't about to let him get away with it. But as the backlash from OnlyFans continued to mount, Jack found himself facing an even more damning reality. His hypocrisy was becoming impossible to ignore, and it was only a matter of time before the internet would expose it for all to see. The internet didn't hesitate to react when Jack Doherty's controversial moves started gaining traction. It was as if the floodgates opened and the online world was more than ready to tear into him. From viral memes to sharp-witted videos, Jack was swiftly made the target of widespread mockery. His "I'm kidding" defense became a running joke, quickly turning into the punchline of countless online discussions. But amidst all the humor, there was a serious undercurrent. People weren't just laughing at Jack, they were genuinely concerned about the impact impact of his actions. It wasn't just about Jack anymore. It was about the real-world implications of an influencer with a massive young following promoting gambling and explicit content. The more his defense became a joke, the more people began to point out how his behavior could lead to a dangerous normalization of these issues. The outrage wasn't just confined to memes. It spread quickly across all social media platforms, with users dissecting his actions and calling out the hypocrisy. Jack was no longer seen as just another influencer. It was becoming painfully clear that his refusal to take responsibility was more damaging than his initial missteps. Comparisons to other influencers who had similarly faced backlash for promoting harmful content started flooding the conversation, drawing parallels between Jack and others who had been publicly shamed for exploiting their platforms for financial gain without considering the consequences. As the criticism continued to gain momentum, it became evident that Jack's time in the spotlight was rapidly coming to an end. What started as a seemingly innocent promotion spiraled into a massive public relations nightmare. The more Jack tried to shrug off the accusations, the more the internet dug in, reminding him that he couldn't escape the consequences of his actions. His refusal to address the real issues only made the backlash that much more intense. But Jack's indifference to the mounting criticism wasn't going to shield him for long. With every deflection, the cracks in his persona grew wider, and soon, the hypocrisy he tried to ignore would catch up to him in ways he couldn't deny. One of the most glaring contradictions in Jack's actions was his admitted awareness of the destructive nature of gambling. Time and time again, he openly acknowledged knowing people whose lives had been ravaged by gambling addiction, yet he continued to partner with gambling platforms and promote them to his impressionable audience. This wasn't just a careless mistake. This was a pattern of behavior that showed a complete disregard for the harmful consequences of his actions. Jack wasn't ignorant of the risks. He knew firsthand how damaging gambling could be, especially for young and vulnerable individuals, many of whom followed him religiously. But despite this, he kept pushing gambling to his audience, choosing profit over responsibility. This hypocrisy didn't sit well with fans or critics. People were quick to point out the moral disconnect between Jack's acknowledgement of gambling's dangers and his willingness to profit from it. It wasn't just a simple lapse in judgment, it was a deliberate choice to ignore the lessons he should have learned from the people around him. The internet quickly called him out, and the backlash grew louder. What made matters worse was his refusal to change course. Instead of using his platform for good, Jack doubled down, further alienating those who had once supported him. His inaction in the face of growing concern made it clear that fame and fortune were his true priorities, and he was willing to sacrifice integrity to maintain them. The emptiness in his logic was hard to ignore, and the more he deflected the criticism, the more his reputation crumbled. People were left asking, was the money and fame really worth it if it meant betraying the very values Jack once claimed to stand for? His audience, especially the younger fans who looked up to him, began to feel betrayed. They wanted a role model they could trust, someone who would take responsibility for their actions, but Jack's refusal to change made them question everything they thought they knew about him. With this hypocrisy laid bare, it was clear that Jack's actions had consequences that couldn't be ignored. The internet was holding him accountable, and it seemed that no matter how much he tried to deflect, his future was quickly spiraling into chaos. How would this all play out for him, and would he ever be able to recover from the mess he'd made? In the end, Jack Doherty's series of missteps painted a clear picture. No amount of "I'm just kidding" could save him from the consequences of his actions. The internet held him accountable, calling out his reckless promotions of gambling and adult content to an audience that looked up to him. While Jack might have tried to brush off the criticism, it's hard to ignore the long-term effects on his reputation and career. The backlash could cost him his credibility, his audience, and his brand. And with the internet's unforgiving nature, Jack may find himself facing even harsher consequences as time goes on. Jack may be able to dodge responsibility for now, but the internet never forgets. If you thought these were crazy, you won't want to miss what happens in this next video.